So now let's look at our calculations with criteria sheet. And you can see we've got markets, order dates, order revenue, and order type. And you can also see as we go down here, we have a lot of data. So we go down, we've got 867 data points, so quite a bit. First thing I want to do is I want to sit there and, because we're going to be manipulating this, I want to give these range names. So we'll go into our formulas, we'll go into create from selection. Now notice, because there are words in here, it's saying, okay, well, we're going to do it from the top row and the left row. I'm just going to tell it from the top row. And hit OK. And so now we'll come over here and I'll just type in range names. And let me justify this to the left. I'll make this bold so we can see it. And then formulas, using formula paste names. Now this is pasting all the stuff in the workbook. That's not what we want to do. I only want to do the ones that I put here. So market, I'll hold control, ordered up. I'm going to have to do them individually, unfortunately. And actually, the easiest way is going to be, because if I do that, what I was doing, I was just going to bring it up in a formula. I'm just going to hit paste names. We'll paste the list. And actually, I'm going to justify this all to the left. And now I'm going to get rid of, because it's telling me which workbook it's in, I can get rid of these guys. I'll just hit delete. And then these guys I'll right click, delete, and tell it to shift up. So now I market, order date, revenue, and order type are all named. So that will make things a little bit easier for me. And so the reason I'm doing this is I want to sit there and go, well, I want to do average revenue, but I want to break it down by market. And so just like we use Countifs, this is where we're going to use average if. And so average if, I'm going to average things based on whether or not they make a certain criteria. So in this case, I'm going to average if my range. And so my range is going to be my market. So we'll just type in market. Now, the neat thing about that, as you can see, I had to pause that for a second because my German Shepherd was going nuts. As you can see, I start to type in market, and notice instead of a function, you see this little symbol coming up that says market. So once I define a range name, it kind of puts it into Excel as like, okay, you've defined this, I'll bring it up so you can do things. So remember when we had that name error, and I mentioned that it was all based off a function. It can also be based off a range name. If you put a range name in that doesn't exist, that's where you get the name error. So I wanted to go through the list of market. Notice that it highlights everything. And I just noticed I'm pointing at the screen to show you all, but you can't see me pointing, so I have to remember that. So I wanted to go through market, and the criteria is I want it to be G6. So I'll click on G6. So I wanted to go through there and okay, if I find something that is G6, and then what I wanted to do is I wanted to average the revenue. So we'll type in, and I can look over here and go, well, order revenue is my other one, so I'm going to type in order, and there's my revenue, so I will do that. And I will close that. Now, a big thing with this is I'm going to index it. And so everything's locked in except G6, which will go from market A, B, C, D. But if I hit enter, now what it does is it averaged if. So that's not the average of everything. That's the average of this row when the market equals G6, which is A. So it's a handy way to filter out data. Now I can do this with the other three. I'm just going to double click here and drag that down. Because the only thing indexing is the market, everything else is locked in. It's not going to move. And so that's a quick way of being able to calculate out what's going on. Okay, so now let's do an average revenue with multiple equations. Okay, so now I want to average the stuff that's full service or labor only. So we're going to have to use a different one. So we're going to go average ifs. And so it finds the average for cells specified given multiple conditions. Okay, so average if. So we want to do the range. And so what we're going to do is we're going to start with the order revenue. So that's the average range. So order revenue. Once again, I just started to type it in to bring that up. So I have the order revenue. Now the order revenue has got to be based on a criteria. And this, notice this one's a little bit backwards from the average if, because we put in our criteria first and then we put in our averages. Now we're putting in what we're going to average first, and then we're going to list off the multiple criteria. And so the first criteria is going to be, we want to look through our market. So we're going to put in the market. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is put in the market. So I'm just going to start to type it in. And so now that's the criteria range. Now if I hit comma, it's going to go, okay, what's the criteria? Well, the criteria is I'm going to want, once again, that cell of G, right here, G20. Now, I am going to eventually drag this around and index this a little bit. So I'm going to drag it down. So I want the number to be able to change, but I'm also going to drag it over to the labor. So I don't want the column to change. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the $ in front of G. So that way it'll index rows but won't index columns, which is fine. That's what I want. Now I'm going to add a second, can't put the comma there, it's going to be after the cell. I want to put my second criteria range in, and that's going to be for full service. So I'm going to type in order type, double click that, now it highlights that green. And so the order type now I want to match this order up here. Now for this guy, once again, I want him to be able to index horizontally, but not, I want him to be able to index vertically, not horizontally. So we're going to lock in the 19. So that way this can be G19, H19, I19, so it'll move there. Okay, and so that should be all of our arguments. So what it's going to do now is it's going to average the revenue if the market is equal to whatever the market here is, which is A, and full service only. So I hit enter, 48.75, and I constructed it like that, so now I can also just drag it over for labor. And so now if I look at this equation here, it's going to average the order revenue based on the market, which this column here is A, and then the order type, this column here, is equal to the labor. Okay, and so now that I've set it up that way, I can just drag this all the way down. And that gives us everything we want. The question is, we're getting a divide by zero error. Oh, that's a problem. So divide by zero means that the denominator is 0. Okay, so what got messed up in our equation? Well, nothing really, we don't know that something got messed up in the equation, because why would it end up being a divide by zero error? Because average, what does average do? It's going to add up all the numbers and divide it by the number of instances. So the only way that we're going to get a divide by zero error, I don't know why I'm misspeaking that, error, I've been hanging around my children too long. The only way that we're going to get a divide by zero error is if there are no instances of full service work in that market D. Okay, so let's figure out if that's true. So now we're going to use Countifs, and this is going to count the number of cells that hit multiple criteria. So criteria range 1. Well, I want to know, I only want to look at D market. So we're going to look at the market, and then the criteria, oops, I didn't write a D down here. So what I can do is I could click up here on D, or I can just say, once again, remember the parentheses tells Excel that we're just going to print a value in there. I just wanted to look up the market D. So I'll write in D. And so the next thing that I want to do is, because I need more than just that, I need to know which ones are full service. So I will go in there and order type, get that locked in, comma, and I'm going to do the same thing, except instead of clicking on something, I'll type in full service. Now the only issue with doing it the way that I just did is if I misspelled service or if I misspelled D, it's not going to work right. That's why it's almost always better to link this back to a cell, but I'm just showing you another way to do it. If I hit enter, notice I have 0 full service orders at market D, which completely explains why this would be a divide by 0 error. So typically what I would do is, well, I don't like divide by zeros. What you could do is you could construct another statement that if it's divide by 0 to show something else. And so what we could do is we could stack another thing and go if, and this would really only work if I counted out the number of full service and whatnot, but if, let's say that this cell is equal to 0. And so the if, remember, logical test, value of true, value of false. So if it's equal to 0, let's say that I want it to say NA for not applicable. So I put parentheses, okay, print that, comma. If it's false, I want you to go count all that. And then we'll just close that up. Notice that parentheses are also color-coded, so you can make sure that you know you got the right parentheses. And so there we go. So now instead of showing that divide by 0 error, it sits there and it does the logical test and goes, oh wait, there is no full service orders in market D, so the average is not applicable because there is nothing in market D.